all this area back in here, San Antonio Shoreline, Cottonwood Bayou, the back lakes that are all back of these areas here that dump out into the San Antonio Bay have been consistently pretty good. You know, we're catching lots of trout out of these areas, some scattered redfish in these areas, a few flounder in these areas, in these mouths and in these guts. You know, our weather's kind of been all over the place a little bit. Temperatures up and down. Water levels have been back up, a little unusual. Typically this time of year, we usually start having our wintertime tides. By this time, we've had a few negative tides, but that has not happened so far this year. We're still more water in the system, but that can all fluctuate. We have the big moon that's going to be on top of us really quick here in the next day or so. So the moon can suck this water out of some of these areas. So make sure that you pay attention to your tide reports for this upcoming week to see what that water levels are going to be doing. What that's allowed us to be able to do is get back in some of these areas a little further than we normally would, unless you have an airboat or some type of mud boat or something to get you really skinny in some of these back lake areas. There are some scattered redfish that are in back of these areas. We've been throwing corkies, soft dines, XLs, and in the mirror lure Little Johns as well, and throwing the XLs in the Little Johns. Down south, the typical culprits there that we've been throwing those for a long time. You know, your Twisted Tea, your White Ice, Purple Rain, all those flavors in both the original and the burner shads have been very good. Again, 16th ounce jig heads is all you need, especially when you get in these back lake areas, because typically all you're going to be fishing is maybe thigh or less deep water when you're wading these areas around the edges and around some of the little islands that are out in the middle of these bigger back lakes. So you don't need anything heavier than a 16th. You just don't. I mean, if you put an 1/8 ounce on there, you're going to battle grass all the time. It's not going to be very successful for you. But the corkies in the floater and the originals have been good. I primarily like to throw the original Paul Brown just because it's such a versatile bait. It gives you a lot of different options to how you can work that particular bait. But the one thing that's been pretty consistent is you need to work it pretty slow to make sure that you're allowed to work down into the water column. It's not a fast working bait. You can if you want to, but it works and more productive when you slow it all down. Also, you know, our knocking tails have been dynamite. In heavy metal has been really good, and in the greenback primarily, those two specific colors have been really good in these back lake areas and in these mouths. We come on down all the way down to Panther, get in this back lake area back here, back behind the point. It's been good, especially with the water levels being up. This area in here in Panther Lake and Swan Lake, there's lots of good little areas that are spots that are tucked within the area, and that's what you primarily want to be able to do, is to work spots within the area, because you can stay inside a Panther and work 5 or 6 different little spots within that and spend a lot of good time, quality time, and you can locate you some fish in there using these all these different baits that I've been talking about. We've gone all the way down to Cedar Lake when this water level was up, and you know, Cedar Lake's a really good little lake there that's just right off the San Antonio Bay system. Haven't got over into Twin that much, but Cedar has been pretty solid. Throwing everything that we've talked about: the soft dines, the corkies, the XLs, both the knock and tail and the down south, and also Marker 54 jerk shrimp in the white shrimp has been really good as well. Failed to mention that earlier, working that, but man, you can get that out here on this edge with our temps kind of fluctuating somewhat. You know, we've kind of leveled off as far as what our air temp, so it's affected the water temp as well. So we're hanging in that mid 60 to low 60 mark, and that bait's been very good. And just bouncing it off the bottom, or if you want to put it underneath the popping cork, you can do that as well. But it has been effective. So there's lots of different choices that you can have in your box when you're working these areas for this upcoming week. Just remember, we got big moon that's going to be in place. So you want to downsize those baits. So your burner shads, your shrimp, the Marker 54 shrimp would be a good choice. The soft dines, the Little Johns would all be great choices in that size frame, and just let the fish dictate to you what they want. Make sure that you're incorporating those majors and minors into your day. Pay attention to what your water levels are and any type of weather issues that may be approaching as you fish in these areas. Here in the Paul Mott area, all these up here on this shoreline here, we come back to this part of this shoreline right here, backing it around. You got Fence Lake that you can come back into this area here. I know these areas have been pretty good, especially when the water levels are up. Again, this is one of these areas that if you don't have the right kind of boat, you can kind of get yourself in trouble, especially when the water levels are starting to drop out on you. It gets pretty skinny back here. There's some deeper areas in it. If you are aware of those, you need to be fishing these or on the edges of those. So primarily what we've been doing is dropping the boat in semi-deep water, and then get on the edge where that deeper parts of the water in here, and just working the edges of that. We've located some nice redfish in here, some scattered flounder, pull out an occasional black drum, but that's the primary things we have caught back in these areas. Scattered trout or two, nothing great, but the opportunity is there if you stay and you work these areas. Again, 16th ounce jig heads. Again, that's all you're going to need, especially when you're working in the thigh deep or less water. It allows the bait to float through the water system. It gets down into it, but you can control that descent really well with especially the different styles of baits. Again, we're going to have a big moon that's going to be on top of it this week. So smaller profile baits, the Mirror Lure Little Johns, the Burner Shads, the down south, the Knock and Tail lures in the 3 1/4 size. That would be like your smoked flavor or your watermelon red. You can still throw the 4-inch, but I would start out with those smaller size baits just to see if that's going to really be the ticket for you. Again, work the shrimp back in here. The Marker 54 jerk shrimp in the white has been really good in some of these areas, either under a cork or free lining it. I like to free line it and just kind of bounce it off the bottom because it's got a 1/8 ounce weight that's in that, but you're able to really work that bait along that grass line edge and keep it maybe just a hair above it. If you can really control what your rod's doing and how you're letting that bait descend in there for you. All these areas out here, we come up around to the Mott, we come back into Long Reef Bend area. We like to work this shoreline over here closer to the south side, depending on what kind of wind we have. It's kind of been a little bit everywhere, but this area here in Long Reef Bend, you can work a lot of different areas with whatever wind you got. The only one that's probably not the best would be a northwest or straight west wind. It'd be really difficult to work some of these areas, but I think primarily what we've had in the last week or so has been primarily north, northeast, south, southeast. All this area up in here can light up for you working these areas. Again, I like to get into these guts that are a little bit deeper water around the grass on the drop, using those particular baits. And again, the majors and minors have been spot on as far as the productivity around those time frames. Give yourself plenty of time if you're going to fish whatever area that you want to go to, whether it's up in this area or somewhere south or over in Estes. It doesn't matter. Whenever you incorporate that major and minor in there, just make sure that you fish it throughout the whole thing, and just kind of pay attention to what your bite frames are and when your bite's picking up and when it starts to taper off, and you start to kind of get an idea on the intensity and when the bite frame will pick up for you. So again, work these areas here, majors, minors, look at what your water levels and temps are doing, and continue to work all these areas. Up here in Turtle Pen, back here in the back of Copano, man, this is another one of those areas I really like to spend a lot of time in, especially when the conditions are right and you go a little bit cooler water. Starts to get down in that low 60s, maybe high 50s, 58, 59, 60, 61, somewhere along in there. These back lake mouths, they've got perfect structure and bottom that's there. You've got a lot of different kind of structure that's in there, and it really sets up well. So again, one thing you must take in consideration to this time of year, we've had, November was probably one of the coldest ones we've ever had for several years for here. And what that did is it really drove a lot of bait out of here and put those fish in a nice feeding mode. So some of the trout that we're catching have got some really good shoulders on them, much thicker, really quality looking fish. Redfish, the same thing. But when you get into areas like this and you're working it, make sure that you pay attention to see, if you've got just a little bit of bait working. Just a little bit of bait is going to be just right. And you're not going to, again, you're not going to be like lots of bait that's going to take place like it does in the summertime. So look for just if you see one or two things of mullet that are flipping here or there, you see maybe even the presence of mullet. Even if you don't see mullet working, especially back in this area here, because it's this is the end of this particular estuary as you come out of Copano Bay and you get back into Copano Creek and that area there. Look for your ospreys. Ospreys are great indicators that there's bait that's working in the area. You may not see it, but they do. So if you have a hovering osprey, or obviously if you see a pelican diving into the water where they're like really close and they just fall off into the water really quick, they're diving on bait. So that's another great indicator that you can kind of tuck away for. You can go, okay, we've got the food source that we need in here. Now we just need to see if we've got a major or minor that's coming. See if we've got a high or low tide that's going to be working in here, if we've got some type of current working. So all this area back in here lends itself to be really good for that if you've got some stuff that you can tuck away in your favor. Again, down south's been great back in here. Mark 54 has been good in here. Your knock and tail lures have been really good, especially in the heavy metal and the greenback have been good in this area. But again, we've got Big Moon that's going to be here, so you start out with those smaller baits. If you've got 2 or 3 people that are happen to be with you and you're not by yourself, then have 3 different profiles on. So somebody throw a small one, a medium size, and maybe just a little bit bigger. Or even if you want to throw the Soft Dine XL, it gives you a little bit different profile. Primarily been working plastics back in these areas here off this big old mud flat that's on this side to here has been pretty good to the drop. Again, some scattered trout in here have been good. Some scattered redfish have been good. Had not caught any flounder back in this area, but the 2 main things that we like to target, trout and redfish, have been. So take that into consideration when you're working these areas here. Make sure that you see what the weather patterns are going to be doing. I think this upcoming week's pretty docile as far as any type of major weather, but again, it's always in your best interest to make sure they're checking all that kind of stuff before you go out to make sure you don't get caught in something bad. Take your time to work these areas here. This bite frame can be kind of slow from time to time, so make sure you just really don't kind of blow through it, because you can walk through fish if you're going too fast. Be really methodical, working the area out in front of you, and just see if you can pick up a pattern that you work back in these areas.